Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you for joining today's online course. This year commemorates the 40th anniversary of the Galugaras of June and November 1984. This 4-week course will provide you with an overview of Sikh-India relations from the 1930s to the eve of June 1984 attack on the Harimandar Sahib complex. Today's our second week, so in our second week, we will be examining Sikh-India relations post-1947, focusing on the 50s and 60s. Before we get started, I'll reintroduce you all to our lecturer today, Santbir Singh. Santbir Singh is a research associate at the Sikh Research Institute. He's currently pursuing his PhD in sociology at York University. His research focuses on Sikh activism and the inherent relationship between Sikhi and anarchism, explored through historical and contemporary Sikh movements, such as the Kisan Morcha or Farmers' Protest of 2020 to 2021. So I'll hand it over to Santbir Singh now.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Great to have you all here. So today, last time we talked about the 1930s up until partition/independence. And I say partition first because for Sikhs, it wasn't that much of an independence, and it's partition that has stayed with us as a trauma on the community for the last 70 years or 80 years. Now we're going to be looking at part 2, the struggle for Panjabi Suba. And this part of the course will be looking at 1950s and 1960s Punjab, starting with right after partition and moving up until 1966. One of the first things that the Indian government had to do when it became an independent country, and remember that India did not become an independent country in the sense that there was a revolution. It was not a popular uprising by the people where the people took over from the previous government. It was more a transfer of power between the British and the Indians. And this transfer of power meant that all the laws and all of the systems put in place before partition independence stayed in place after 47. So for example, the Sikh Gurdwara Act of 1925, which determined the structure of the SGPC and the way that Sikh Gurdwaras were governed, that stayed in force after 47. And it went from being a colonial law to an Indian law. So that there was a continuity between the systems of governance pre-partition and post-partition. One of the first things India had to do was create a constitution in order to determine what would the structure be of their new governance model. There was a lot of debate, obviously, in the years leading up to independence about what this constitution would look like. For Sikhs, there had been inherent promises made to the Sikhs about what a constitution would look like for Sikhs pre-47. I'll give a couple of quotes that are here on the screen right now. In the divided India-Punjab, special constitutional measures are imperative to meet the aspirations and rights of the Sikhs. This is from the Legislative Assembly in 1947, the Legislative Assembly being the government body that was going to make the Constitution. In 1929, much earlier, the Indian National Congress in the Lahore session said, in the future, Congress shall accept no constitution which does not meet the satisfaction of the Sikhs. Excuse me. So there was these promises that were made before independence. And what type of constitutional measures were Sikhs looking for? They were looking for protections for minorities. Sikhs were a minority population. We are less than 2% of India's population. So we were looking for a constitution that protected minority rights in some way, in a constitutional way, so that there would be safeguards against rule of the majority. The other thing that Sikhs were looking for was for a special structure in Punjab where Sikhi and Punjabi culture and language could flourish, that there would be certain constitutional safeguards for the Punjabi language, for Punjabi culture, and for Sikhi. So those are what Sikhs were looking for pre-independence, and let's see what happened after independence. So when the Constitution was actually being written, there were two Sikh representatives on the Constitution Committee. Hukam Singh was one of them. Hukam Singh became later a Speaker of the Parliament, so he was an established Congress politician, in fact. But even as a Congress politician, once the Constitution was completed, he did not sign the Constitution and refused to sign it. And he made a speech in the Constitution Committee, and this is a quote from the speech. The larger speech is available, and I think I shared it with you all as one of the documents for this week. Naturally, under these circumstances, as I have stated, the Sikhs feel utterly disappointed and frustrated. They feel that they have been discriminated against. Let it not be misunderstood that the Sikh community has agreed to this constitution. I wish to record an emphatic protest here. My community cannot subscribe its assent to this historic document. So Hukam Singh, who's a Congress politician, not a Shromani Akali Dal politician, who is part of the government structure, who's part of the Constitution Committee, as a Sikh, he's saying, I cannot support this Constitution. And the reason why he can't support the Constitution is because there were no safeguards given to minorities at all in the Constitution. The fear was that eventually India might become a rule of the majority, a tyrannical rule of the majority, and there would be no safeguards for minority populations. And this fear has unfortunately come true, and we can see it in modern India today with the Modi government of the BJP, where minority populations, even the Muslim minority, which is a huge minority, millions of Muslims live in India, are being discriminated against and are being demonized by the Indian government and Indian press. So Sikhs were very disappointed in the Constitution, and it's very important to remember that Sikhs never agreed to the Indian Constitution, even though it had been promised beforehand that that a constitution would not be accepted unless Sikhs accepted it. Sikhs have yet to this day accepted the Indian Constitution. Now, there's one issue with the Indian Constitution that is especially grating, which is Article 25 of the Indian Constitution. And in Article 25 of the Indian Constitution, it says simply that Sikhs are considered to be Hindus like Jains and Buddhists. Now, this is technical language and it's for the reasons of personal law. It doesn't mean that Sikhs don't exist, but it means that for the sake of personal law and rules are surrounding the way that the government deals with these minority populations, Buddhists, Sikhs, and Jains, that they are considered Hindus and that the other population is considered Muslims or Christians. So the fact that in the Constitution, Sikhs were not considered a separate population, were not even given the right of being a separate people, was especially difficult for Sikhs to swallow, an especially difficult pill for Sikhs to swallow, and very disappointing for Sikhs. The issue of the Constitution and Article 25 of the Constitution specifically has come up again and again in Sikh-India relations, and was a major point of contention in the 1980s during the Dharm Yudh Morcha, leading up to the June 1984 Kalukara. So the issue of the Constitution has been one that has not gone away, that has remained as a problem within India and Sikh relations, and is an issue that continues to sort of haunt India-Sikh relations, so that even today Sikhs are bitterly disappointed with the fact that they are not formally represented in the Indian Constitution, and the Sikh representatives never formally agreed to the Constitution. So we talked about this last time, but I wanted to just make go over some more detailed promises that were made by Nehru and the Congress Party. And Nehru, of course, Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India and the head of the Congress Party. One of the main promises that was made was that states would be reorganized along linguistic lines. So Punjab at that time contained a lot of areas that were not Punjabi speaking. There was areas that became the modern state of Haryana. There were areas that became the modern state of Himachal Pradesh. And then there was the areas that became the modern state of Punjab. So in Haryana, they spoke Haryani. In Himachal Pradesh, they spoke what we call Pahari languages. And then in Punjab, of course, they spoke Panjabi. And the whole point was that Punjab was supposed to be reorganized according to linguistic lines. And this was so that minority populations, their culture, as the Calcutta Resolution of Congress in 1937 says, so that culture, language, and script of minority populations can be protected. That was the whole point of creating linguistic-based states. Nehru in 1945 said redistribution of provincial boundaries is essential and inevitable. I stand for some autonomous unit as well. If Sikhs desire to function as such a unit, I should like them to have the same autonomous in the province so that they may have a sense of freedom. So Nehru went even further in 1945, saying not only should states be based around linguistic and cultural and language borders, but that Sikhs should also have some level of autonomy in their state as well. What would that autonomy look like? Well, we can look at various countries around the world that have a federal structure where they have large minority populations that don't fit in with the larger majority. I think three really good examples are Belgium, Spain, and Canada. In Canada, you have Quebec. In Spain, you have Catalan and the Basque regions. And in Belgium, you have the two communities, one French speaking and one Flemish speaking. And in all of these cases, the minority populations are given certain rights and responsibilities taken away from the federal government so that they have more autonomy than a normal state or province would in that federal structure. They have control over education, for example, language rights. They have control over cultural rules. They have control, and language is really the big one, especially here in Canada with Quebec. It's that Quebec is a unilingual province where French is promoted and supported extensively to act as a bulwark against the larger English majority of Canada. So that was what Sikhs were looking for, something like the way that Quebec is treated within Canada. Not that Quebec was a separate country, and that's not what Sikhs were looking for. Again, Sikhs were never looking for in this era for a separate country. They were looking for within the Indian federal structure for certain rights. Now let's look at what actually happened after 47. And we're going to read from Indira Gandhi, who was Jawaharlal Nehru's daughter and only child, and who became the next Prime Minister of India upon his death. Indira Gandhi, in her autobiography, writes, "The Congress found itself in a dilemma. To concede to Akali demands would mean abandoning a position which it was firmly committed and letting down its Hindu supporters in the Panjabi Suba. The merits were of no consideration as the policy of the Congress, as enunciated in 1949 by Jawaharlal, Vallabhbhai, and Pattabhai Sityaramaiah, had been not to concede reorganization of North India, whatever the merit of such a proposal might be." And then again, in an article in a newspaper in 1970, while she was Prime Minister, Indira Gandhi said he, Jawaharlal Nehru, was strongly opposed to the idea of a Punjabi state. So Nehru made these promises before 47, saying, yeah, we're going to protect Sikhs. Sikhs are going to get a state where they even have autonomy, where their language is protected, where Punjabi language and culture is protected. And then immediately after 47, he's like, no, this is not going to happen. I will let other states in India be reorganized along linguistic lines. And they did allow other states to be reorganized along linguistic lines. But I cannot allow Punjab to be reorganized along linguistic lines. And there are a few reasons for why this happened. One is that the Hindu Punjabi community in Punjab was really against Panjabi Suba happening. And we'll talk more about this later on in this week's lecture. The other was simply a fear of Sikhs and Sikh demands. The Congress Party had seen how strong Sikhs were as a political force before 47, how integral we were to the independence movement. And they were scared that if any rights or responsibilities were given to Sikhs post 47, that Sikhs would quickly get out of control and not be able to be subsumed into the larger India nationalist project. And so, very much so, Nehru went back on all of his promises made to Punjabis and Sikhs pre 47 and insisted instead that Punjab not be reorganized along linguistic lines. Nehru's goal for India was a strong central government. He did not like the idea of states having their own rights and responsibilities. And you can see this in the structure of the way that India federalism is set up. For example, on a very basic level, India states don't have flags, for example. They all use the flag of the central government. So they don't have a unique identity or structure of their own, unlike US states or Canadian provinces or countries in the UK or provinces in Spain or all these other examples around the world. The second thing that really ensured a really strong central government was something called president's rule. And president's rule was this idea that if the central government didn't like what the state government was doing, they could simply overthrow the state government and declare president's rule and control the state government directly from the center. Now, this would be a pretty shocking development in a place like America or Canada if all of a sudden the federal government said, okay, we're not going to respect the governor or the premier of this province or state. We are not going to respect the legislature or the Senate or Congress of the state or state Congress of the state. We are going to overthrow it and we are going to rule the state or province directly from Ottawa or Washington, D.C. But this is, in fact, something that not only can happen in India, but happens quite commonly in India. And this happened several dozen times in Punjab throughout the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. It happened again and again and again, where if the state government was not to the liking of the federal government would simply overthrow the state government and declare president's rule. And that would just get rid of the state government completely. It seems crazy, but that's the type of government that Nehru wanted, a very strong central government controlling the country without states' rights for the individual states. And this was directly in counter to what Sikhs had worked for pre-independence. Sikhs had thought that they were going to be getting a federal structure within India, and that's what they were fighting for against the British. Some type of United States of India, for example, was the term that was sometimes used. So here are some quotes by Nehru. Creating a Punjabi state is against the prosperity of Hindus. He's speaking about Hindu Punjabis, and would put Sikhs in other states in grave danger. Now, what that means is that it's a threat. It's saying that if Sikhs get independence, or get, not independence, sorry, if Sikhs get a Punjabi speaking state in Punjab, that Sikhs in other parts of India are going to suffer for that. Granting the demand for Punjabi state is out of the question. And finally, enough is enough. If you do not stop your protests, I will teach you a hard lesson that you will not forget for many generations to come. So these are the type of statements that Nehru was making in the back rooms in the 1950s and 60s. This is how Nehru was talking about Sikhs. And this is where you can see that what happened in June of 1984 was not something that came out of nowhere, but in fact was a through line from early India-Sikh relations. It was, in fact, in many ways, unfortunately, the natural conclusion of the way that the Indian state interacted with Sikhs, starting in 47 and going forward. So in the early 1950s, and there's a lot of sort of political stuff happening here that I can't get into because it's too much detail, but the Shromi Akali Dal after independence was pretty much like, do we even need to exist anymore? We were in existence because we were fighting against the British. Maybe we should all just join Congress and work together with the federal government. But it quickly became clear that the promises made to Sikhs would not be followed through. And so in the 1950s, Akali Dal reformed and started to ask for a Punjabi speaking state. The government response to this was autocratic and authoritarian, leading to mass arrests and violence against Sikhs. In fact, it was so bad that in 1955, the Punjab government, which was Congress controlled, made it illegal to say the words Panjabi Suba Zindabad. So we're talking about a mere 8 years after independence. It is now illegal to just say the words Panjabi Suba Zindabad or Long Live Punjabi State. This is really a level of authoritarian governance that I think a lot of us don't really wrap our heads around, where it can become illegal for you to say, if you were in Texas, for example, long live Texas, or if you were in Quebec, vive le Quebec, that it would become illegal to say that and you could be thrown in jail for that. And not only could you be thrown in jail for that, then you would be thrown in jail for that. And thousands of Sikhs got arrested during the Panjabi Suba Zindabad protest or morcha. It was the first morcha that Sikhs started against the Indian government. We had done morchas in the 1920s against the British in order to get independence of our gurdwaras from Mahants. And now, for the first time, we realize that we need to start doing morchas against the Indian government. And the first morcha was not for Punjabi-speaking states. This is very important. The first morcha was just for the right to say that we are in favor of a Punjabi-speaking state. That's how authoritarian the Indian government had gotten. And during the Panjabi Suba Zindabad protest, the Indian government, the Punjab police more specifically, entered the Harimandar Sahib complex, and we can see them here marching on the Prakarma. This is a photograph from 1956. Marching on the Harimandar Sahib complex, came in and arrested Akali Dal activists who were struggling in the Panjabi Suba Zindabad protest. They beat up Sikhs. 2 Sikhs died from their injuries from being beaten up by the Punjab police in this attack. The langar was stopped at the Langar Hall. Teja Singh Samundri Hall, the headquarters of the Akali Dal and the SGPC, were taken over. And the police came and interrupted the kirtan going on at Harimandar Sahib. Really a shocking event. So shocking that the government themselves realized that they had gone too far, and the Congress governor of Punjab, Bhim Sen Sachar, apologized afterwards and promised, and this is quite an ironic promise, of course, that the government would never ever enter the Darbar Sahib complex in the future. He came and he made this promise in the complex. He came to the complex, Matha Teked at Harimandar Sahib, Matha Teked at Akal Takht Sahib, made a speech, apologized for the Punjab police coming into the complex, and then promised there that the government would never enter the complex again, and that the complex would remain sovereign territory of the Sikhs, where the government would have no sway. So it became illegal to say Panjabi Suba Zindabad. They turned this back after the attack on Harimandar Sahib in 1955. Sorry, I said in the earlier slide 1956, but it was 1955. I apologize for that mistake. And it was 1955, and this, even though that the ban had been lifted, there was still violence against Sikhs when they would say Panjabi Suba Zindabad. And the youngest martyr of the Panjabi Suba movement is considered to be a young boy, Kaka Inderjit Singh, who was a 10-year-old child living in Karnal, which is now in modern Haryana, in a more Hindu-dominated area. And he was coming home from school and he was shouting Panjabi Suba Zindabad, Panjabi Suba Zindabad. And he was beaten and thrown into a well by police officers for shouting Panjabi Suba slogans and killed by the Punjab police. He was a 10-year-old child. So this is a type of violence that is occurring against Sikhs during the Panjabi Suba time. Kaka Inderjit Singh was a very well-known Shaheed during the time of Panjabi Suba. We don't remember him as often today, unfortunately. And I think one of the reasons why is because Shaheeds killed by the Indian government became so plentiful that it's hard sometimes to remember a specific Shaheed. But back when he was killed in the 1950s, it was quite a unique event, a horrifying event, that a Sikh would be killed by the police. And in fact, that a Sikh boy would be killed, a child would be killed by the police. Along with the increasing Sikh demands for a Panjabi Suba or Panjabi-speaking state, there grew extensive violence and opposition by Hindu groups against Sikhs. Sikhs started to be labeled as terrorists, traitors, agents of Pakistan, all things that we hear today, still today, whenever Sikhs speak up about their rights. Hindu groups and media spoke up against the Sikh gurus and Sikhs, including the RSS, Arya Samaj, and newspaper publishers like Lala Jagat Narayan, Kushal Chand, and Lal Chand. So in their newspapers, in their organizations, they would disrespect the Sikh gurus, they would disrespect Sikhs, and they would say that Sikhs asking for Panjabi Suba are terrorists, traitors, and agents of Pakistan. And so the rising communalism, and communalism is a word used in India for conflict between ethnic populations. Rising communalism in Punjab was not something that Sikhs instigated. And this is very important because Sikhs get blamed for communalism in Punjab all the time. It was actually something that Hindu Punjabis started to do. And they started to demonize Sikhs. And this was very much done in concert with the central government of Jawaharlal Nehru. This was not something spontaneous that was happening. This was like an organized campaign by the central government. In 1961, Sikhs managed to protest enough that the government finally agreed to a census to figure out which regions of Punjab were actually Punjabi speaking. And famously, Punjabi Hindus in the border regions, so we're talking about close to Punjab, which actually did speak Punjabi and not Haryani, in Punjabi said Asi Hindi bolde, that we speak Hindi, but they said it in Punjabi in the census. So they betrayed their own language and culture because they were told that in order to be good Indians and good Hindus, they had to say that they spoke Hindi and they believed in Hindustan and they were against Panjabi Suba and they were against a Sikh state. We had talked about last time how the leadership of the community was dominated by Master Tara Singh. In the 1960s, we saw the rise of a new leader, Sant Fateh Singh. Here, Sant Fateh Singh is visiting a Gurdwara in England, and he's getting his photograph taken. Sant Fateh Singh became the leader of the Akali Dal in the 1960s and really eclipsed Master Tara Singh as leader. Fateh Singh represented a radical break in terms of leadership. In caste terms, he was a Jat, and the majority of the Sikh population was Jat. And this was one of the reasons why Fateh Singh was popular, because Jat Sikhs felt like Master Tara Singh shouldn't be a leader because he was not a Jat. I know that bringing caste into this discussion is awkward and uncomfortable, but unfortunately, these are the types of metrics that actually exist within the community. He was also from Malabar, which was the richest landowning part of Punjab. He was a sant, meaning he was a religious figure, not just a political figure. And this would continue a trend that would result in later sants also becoming head of the Akali Dal, people like Sant Harchan Singh Longowal. This can also be seen as a real turning point in the caliber of Panthik leadership. Master Tara Singh was not perfect, but what we can say about him was that he was committed to the community, and he was, as much as he tried to be, in favor of creating a Sikh community that followed Sikh principles as much as possible. Sant Fateh Singh was a much more opportunistic leader, and he really represented a degradation in the quality of leadership that we had as a community going forward. We never really recovered from that, unfortunately. Sant Fateh Singh himself was not personally corrupt like many modern Punjabi leaders. He was not personally enriching himself or anything like that, so I do have to give him credit for that. But he was not a very intelligent man, and he was not the best person to be making negotiations with the Indian government about Panjabi Suba. A weird pattern developed, and this is how Sant Fateh Singh actually came into prominence and beat Master Tara Singh as leader of the Akali Dal, which was that Sant Fateh Singh made a promise that he would fast unto death unless Panjabi Suba was made. And then this got him so much praise in the community, and people were so inspired by the fact that he was promised to fast until he died, that he made a promise in front of Guru Granth Sahib to do this. So then Master Tara Singh made a similar promise and said, I will fast unto death also to make sure that Panjabi Suba happens. But Master Tara Singh actually secretly was drinking juice, which was provided by his daughter during his fast. And you get into these absurd, just ridiculous scenarios where we are policing what these old men are eating because they made promises in front of the community to not eat until Panjabi Suba was achieved. And they kept one-upping each other. So Sant Fateh Singh next promised not only to fast until he died, but to immolate himself, that he would burn himself alive at Akal Takht, and actually made a funeral pyre next to Akal Takht Sahib, saying, I will burn myself alive if we do not get Panjabi Suba. And every time the date came close for the fast or the immolation to happen, the central government would make some petty negotiations and be like, okay, we'll talk to you, we'll negotiate with you, let's de-escalate the situation. And then instead of following through on their promises, of course, they would back down. And at first, people were really impressed by Sant Fateh Singh, but as he kept making these promises and then breaking these promises without any real changes happening from the federal government, without any real negotiations happening or any real concessions happening, people grew increasingly disturbed and disheartened by the caliber of Panthik leadership. That our Sikh leadership is making promises in front of Guru Granth Sahib Ji and breaking those promises again and again and again, public promises. And an ardas that a Sikh makes in front of Guru Granth Sahib Ji is sacred. And there are many instances from Sikh history where Sikhs made an ardas in front of Guru Granth Sahib Ji, and even though it was very difficult to follow through, they did not break their promise. One famous example being by Lakshman Singh in 1921 in Saka Nankana Sahib, where they promised to remain peaceful during the struggle against the Mahant of Nankana Sahib. And when the Mahant of Nankana Sahib hired thugs to beat up and kill the Sikhs who were protesting Nankana Sahib's governance by the Mahant, the Sikhs refused to fight back because they had done an ardas at Guru Granth Sahib Ji in front of Guru Granth Sahib Ji saying they would remain peaceful, and all of them were killed. That's how serious Sikhs used to take their ardas. And now we have Panthik leadership going back on their promises again and again and again. And it really, really broke the spirit of the Sikh community until this man came along. Darshan Singh Pheruman was a Congress politician, actually, originally. He was Akali Dal and Congress back when you could be both things at the same time before 1947. He had gone to jail, and there's a very famous picture of him in handcuffs, in fact, at Amritsar railway station when he's in his younger years. And he went to jail several times against the British. And he realized that the community was becoming increasingly disheartened by the fact that these Panthik leaders would make these promises again and again and again, and then kept breaking these promises again and again and again. And so to bring back dignity to the Panth, to bring back the quality of leadership to the Panth that the Panth needed, and to demonstrate that the word of a Sikh was sacred and not something to play around with, Darshan Singh Pheruman in 1969 made a promise that he would not eat until, or drink, sorry, until Panjabi Suba was made, and he would fulfill this promise until the end of his life. He was arrested for making this promise by the government, thrown in jail where he started his fast. Then he was transferred to Amritsar hospital, and he refused to eat for over 77 days. And Darshan Singh Pheruman should have been the end of this sort of ongoing nonsense of we are going to fast unto death and then not fast and then break our promise, breaking our promise again and again. This should have been the end of that cycle, where this man courageously and boldly said, I am not going to allow for Sikh leadership to continually disappoint Sikhs and to continually break their promises in front of Guru Granth Sahib Ji. This is a quote from him, and I think it's important to read. For the last half a century, I have worked through sufferings and tribulations for the freedom of my country and for ensuring ever-increasing abundance and expansion of the Panth. The country is now free, but the Panth is still in bondage. The management of the Sikh Gurdwaras and the conduct of Sikh politics has fallen into the hands of hypocrites, styling themselves as pious men and sons, and those who did not wish the Panth well. The traitors of the Panth and the pious frauds called sons have successfully hatched an ugly conspiracy to eliminate every vestige of wholesome influence of Sikh religion from Sikh politics, with the purpose of making Sikh people slaves of others. This grave sin can only be washed away through a genuine shahidi. To achieve this end, I'm going to lay down my life. And that's what Darshan Singh Pheruman did in an incredible act. And he was called by Sardar Kapoor Singh and by the All India Sikh Students Federation in the 1980s as the first martyr of the Sikh homeland. And his last will and testament is really important to read. I think I've included it in the reading. If not, you can find it online. And this quote is taken from his last will and testament. And in this last will and testament, he really plainly lays out why he's doing what he did, what the quality of Panthik leadership was, and why it had failed Sikhs again and again. And Darshan Singh Pheruman is considered a shaheed for what he did, and really respected and acknowledged by the Panth as a great Sikh. Ironically, this still didn't stop Sant Fateh Singh from making promises. He tried one more time after Darshan Singh Pheruman was Shaheed to make again a promise where he said, I'm going to fast unto death unless the government does this and this and this. And then he broke it after a couple months. And then, not even a couple months, a couple weeks actually. And then the Sikhs were so disgusted by him that people turned their backs on him and he lost his position as leader of the Akali Dal. The Panjabi Suba struggle, which started in the 1950s and went all the way up to 1966, was a massive Panthic effort. Over 660,000 Sikhs went to jail protesting for Panjabi Suba, a huge amount, just an incredible amount of Sikhs. You can see here in these pictures that entire families went to give themselves up for arrest. That entire jathas of women gave themselves up for arrest. Entire villages would go and give themselves up for arrest. Entire communities, Pracharak communities, Sangats would come to Akal Takht, Matha Tek at Harimandar Sahib, do an Ardas at Akal Takht, and then go and give themselves up for arrest to put pressure on the central government. It was a huge movement of the people. Finally, in 1966, the government relented, Indira Gandhi relented, and Panjabi Suba was created. However, there were serious problems with this new Panjabi Suba. First of all, certain Punjabi-speaking areas around Haryana and Himachal Pradesh on the borders, which were actually Punjabi-speaking villages, were included in Haryana and Himachal Pradesh instead of included in Punjab. Secondly, the capital of Punjab, Chandigarh, which was made especially for Punjab after we had lost Lahore during partition, was instead of being given to Punjab, taken away from Punjab and made the joint capital of Haryana and Punjab and made into a federal territory ruled by the federal government, by the central government of India, not by the Punjab government. So Punjab's own capital was not run by Punjab. Really a slap in the face to Punjab. If you look at the state, you can see the changing evolution of Punjab from 1951 to 1966. PEPSU, if you see that acronym there, PEPSU, is Patiala and East Punjab States Union, which was those small independent principalities or kingdoms that had kept their independence from Britain, technically kept their independence, but were actually ruled by the British through puppet governments. So that was Patiala, Nabha, Jind, and those other states like that, Malerkotla and other places like that. PEPSU was first of all dissolved and brought into Punjab. And then Punjab was reorganized. But, and this is Sardar Kapoor Singh speaking in the Lok Sabha on the Punjab reorganization draft bill, the famous Sardar Kapoor Singh, famous Sikh scholar and writer, who later on wrote the Anandpur Sahib resolution. He was a member of the Lok Sabha when this law was passed. And this is his speech from within the Lok Sabha, or the House of Commons, or the Indian legislature. And he said, I oppose this bill on behalf of my constituents and reject it on behalf of my parent party, the Shromani Akali Dal. I do so for three reasons. Firstly, it is conceived in sin. Secondly, it has been delivered by an incompetent and untrained midwife. And thirdly, it is opposed to the best interests of the nation. So we got Panjabi Suba. Finally, after all of these protests, after all these Sikhs went to jail, after Darshan Singh Pheruman died for Panjabi Suba, all of this happened and we got it, but it still wasn't up to what we were actually looking for. And while this is happening, Sant Fateh Singh is celebrating, saying, oh, I finally got Panjabi Suba, I finally got Panjabi Suba, and he's so happy. But in actuality, as Sardar Kapoor Singh is saying, we were screwed over with Panjabi Suba when it was made. Certain areas of Punjab were not included in Punjab. Chandigarh was not included in Punjab, and other major important economic and social concessions were not made to Punjab like they were supposed to be. So was it a victory? Was it a success? I think history shows that ultimately it is very much a mixed bag. Punjab did get finally a state where Punjabi language and culture could be respected and be made the official language of the state. And where Sikhs could also be a majority for the first time in the state. Because if you remember, when we look back at the demographic map of Punjab pre-partition, Sikhs were only like 14% of Punjab's population of United Punjab, pre-partition Punjab. Now, finally, in this much smaller Punjab, Sikhs were actually a majority. Not much of a majority, like 51, 52% of the country, of the state, but we were a majority for the first time, which was a big deal. It meant that we could form government for the first time. And we would have Sikh governors for the first time that were represented Sikh political parties, I should say. Because there were Sikh governors, chief ministers, I should say, sorry, I apologize, not governors, chief ministers. There were Sikh chief ministers before that, like Pratap Singh Gero, but they were central government focused and not representing the interests of the Panth. So Panjabi Suba was this epic, almost 2-decade-long struggle, and then we were left with something that was really truncated and not what we were actually looking for. One of the biggest issues, and those of you who followed, for example, Sidhu Moosewala's last song, SYL, will know about this issue. And it was a brilliant song that he put out, really describing the history of the SYL, the Satluj Yamuna Link Canal, is that Punjab's water and hydroelectric power was one of the biggest issues that Punjab and Sikhs have had with the central government since the creation of India. 95% of agricultural land in Punjab was cultivated, and we need 52.5 million acres per feet per year to irrigate the land. But Punjab's total inflow of water into Punjab is kept at just 32.5 MAF. Water from Punjab was sent to non-riparian or non-river states like Rajasthan and Haryana, and no compensation was given to Punjab, which goes contrary to the UN regulations. The Bukhara Dam, deliberately kept out of Punjab, purposely built outside of Punjab so that the hydroelectrical power from it would not have to be given to Punjab government. Punjab only controls 25% of its own river water. So what has this led to? This has led to massive ecological problems in Punjab. And we all know this. This has led to tube well digging, where instead of using canal water and river water to irrigate our land in Punjab, people dig wells to get water out of the underground aquifers. And every year, the underground aquifers go lower and lower, and less water is in the ground, and those tube wells have to be dug lower and lower, deeper and deeper every year. More and more water, and aquifers do not get replenished easily. They take thousands of years to replenish. And Punjab is essentially becoming a desert because we are sucking the water out from under the ground instead of using the abundant Punjabi water that should be used for Punjabi crops. Now, some people might say, well, don't other states need water too? Isn't that unfair? Don't states like Rajasthan need water? They're a desert. Punjab has never had an issue with other states sharing some of our water. But sending water to a place like Rajasthan just does not, in the levels that they send, does not make sense. Much of the water, and this is really ridiculous, in fact, evaporates before it can reach Rajasthan because of the heat of the desert. So much of the water does not even reach there, it's just totally wasted. And much of the water that's sent to places like Rajasthan are used to irrigate land that was never made to be agricultural land in the first place, and where the water is wasted. Instead of concentrating on land that is made for agriculture, like Punjab is, they are sending water to places which are not made for agriculture, where the water is wasted. And this has been happening for decades and decades and decades. And this culminated in the SYL Canal, where they wanted to take water from the Satluj and take it directly to the Yamuna River, which leads to Delhi, stealing Punjab's water to send to Delhi. So Punjab has no issue with sharing water with Delhi, Haryana, and Rajasthan. It's a fact that so much of the water is wasted, that there's no compensation for Punjab, that the water would be put to much better use in Punjab, and that Punjab doesn't see any of the economic benefits of the hydroelectrical power created by the rivers that Punjab is in fact named after, the land of 5 rivers. So this has been an ongoing issue. This was a major issue during the Anandpur Sahib resolution and the Dharmiyad Morcha. This is still a major issue in Punjab politics today. Control of river water and access to river water is still a major issue, and it's an ecological issue. It's an environmental issue, and it is leading to an ecological disaster in Punjab today. The other big issue, of course, with the new state was that Chandigarh was not made the capital of Punjab. Chandigarh was a state that was specially designed to be the capital of Punjab, and then it was taken away from Punjab. This is largely a symbolic thing, but it's a real slap in the face to Sikhs, who were promised their own state government, who were promised their own capital, and then their state government was taken over and ruled directly by the central government. It would be like if Washington, D.C. took over Albany and controlled New York State's capital directly, instead of New York State controlling their own capital. Or if the Canadian government took over Toronto and Ontario couldn't control their own capital. It would be that absurd. Or if the UK government took over, what's the capital of Scotland? Edinburgh, or I think it's Edinburgh, and it was not run directly by the Scottish government. So it's largely a symbolic thing, but it is a slap in the face to Punjabis and Sikhs. So Panjabi Suba, and this is a Punjab that we know and love today, is very much a mixed bag. What the Panth had been demanding for decades was finally achieved. Sikhs were for the first time a majority in Punjab, but it had serious deficiencies, like Sardar Kapoor Singh said. There were serious issues with it. So that's our lecture on Panjabi Suba. It's a lot of political stuff. It's a lot of technicalities. I hope I was able to keep your attention and that you were able to grasp some of the intricacies of what happened. We don't have the time, unfortunately, to go into really the granular details of Panthic politics, the back and forth between Master Tara Singh and Sant Fateh Singh that was occurring. We don't have time to really go into the details of the way that Panjabi Suba happened and the constant negotiations back and forth with Indira Gandhi and the central government. But I think I've tried to give a general overview of these really important decades. And this Panjabi Suba issue, which was the defining issue of early Punjab history under Indian independence, really reverberates until the modern day and really has a direct impact on what happened in Chirasi in 1984. It was because of the lack of a proper Panjabi Suba that Sikhs struggled for the Anandpur Sahib resolution in the Dharmiyad Morcha. If we had been given what we asked for properly, there would have been no need for the Anandpur Sahib resolution, and there would have been no need for a Dharmiyad Morcha, which resulted ultimately in the government attacking the Harimandar Sahib complex in June of 1984. So there's a direct line between this and 1984. And there's a direct line from this going back to the 1930s. Because why did we have to protest for over 12 years? Thousands of Sikhs sent to jail, Sikhs beaten and killed, babies, children like Kaka Indira Singh being killed, Darshan Singh Pheruman sacrificing himself. Why was all that needed for something that had been promised to us before independence? And that's really important to keep in mind. We had been promised this before independence. We joined India instead of Pakistan under the promise that this is something that we would be given. And instead of being given this, we had to fight for it tooth and nail. And even then, we weren't given it properly. So I think I'll wrap up there and we can go on to question and answers.
Yes, thank you so much, Santveer Singh. So we can start with the first question in the Q&A section. So the question is, how do you think that Punjab's geolocation, so their proximity to Pakistan, has been leveraged by the Indian government to antagonize Sikh movements as Pakistani or anti-nationalist, and also authorize greater control of the region? So yeah, I guess how that proximity to Pakistan and that narrative, what role that plays.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's really important because Punjab being a border state totally changes the dynamic of what Punjab is. And it means that anytime there's an issue with Pakistan, Punjab gets militarized, Punjab suffers the consequences. So much of Punjabi land is controlled by the military. And it means also that anytime Sikhs, and this has been a constant issue, and you can see this goes back all the way to the 1950s, that whenever Sikhs advocate for themselves, whenever Sikhs are struggling for themselves or fighting for their rights, be it in the Kisan Morcha or Panjabi Suba Morcha, they are labeled as agents of Pakistan. And this constantly happens. And this happens in spite of the fact that Sikhs have been super patriotic when it comes to wars with Pakistan. And we have been the majority of people who fight against Pakistan in these battles. In fact, Sant Fateh Singh stopped one of his fasts unto death when the India-Pakistan war broke out in 1965, was it, I believe? 1963. I can't remember the exact date. I apologize. But when that war broke out, Fateh Singh stopped his fast into death and instead rallied the Sikh population to come together and join the Indian army and become patriotic and help fight back against Pakistan and their aggressive war. So Sikhs have in fact always been patriotic and fought against Pakistan, but at the same time we always get claimed to be Pakistani. And it also means that any autonomy, any rights given to Punjab is automatically labeled by the Indian government, by the central government, as some sort of threat to national integrity. And that's what countries like India and China are really, really crazy about, is national integrity. They feel like giving even an inch of land to, or giving autonomy to any region of the country would mean fundamentally breaking the national integrity of the country and weakening the country in front of its enemies. And this has led to a lot of problems for Sikhs, obviously.
Awesome. Thank you for providing that succinct answer. I'm going to ask this question. I remember it from last week, but one of our participants asks, was Article 370 like protection ever considered for Punjab? So what was kind of granted to Kashmir, was that ever considered for Punjab? Would that have been beneficial?
It definitely would have been beneficial. It was never considered seriously for Punjab. Yeah. So, and of course, the Modi government has now taken that away from Kashmir. But that type of autonomy was never considered for Punjab. But that was the type of thing that we had been promised before independence. But even something like that, you can see how easily this government took it away now, because it was not enshrined in the Constitution in a way that a simple majority could overturn. It doesn't mean much in the end, unfortunately, and the federal government could take it away very easily. And so what Sikhs were looking for in the Constitution were safeguards that could not be overdone by a majority in the Lok Sabha, in the House of Commons. But that's unfortunately what India has become. It's become a dictatorship of the majority and oppressive to minorities. Yeah.
Then we have a more logistical question. Who proposed 25B in the Constitution? Who else played a role in the Indian Constitution besides Dr. Ambedkar?
So Dr. Ambedkar is considered the main architect of the Indian Constitution. It's actually quite ironic because he himself writes, and he was an amazing guy, that our Constitution is really not offering enough protections to minorities, and we need to be careful with our Constitution. The Constitution, he gets credited for writing the Constitution, but he did not write it by himself. It was written by what was called this Constitutional Committee, which I think had something like over 150 representatives. And so I'm not sure exactly who wrote Article 25. I'm not an expert in the Indian Constitution. I can look into that and get you an answer for next week. But that's not something I know for certain who actually wrote that specific clause in the Indian Constitution. I don't think it was Dr. Ambedkar, but the Constitution was written by a panel, by a group of people, and Sikhs were supposed to be part of that group that was drafting this Constitution. But of course, we were shut out of that process, and the Sikh representatives disagreed with the way that it occurred. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then another participant asks, how do India riparian laws affect river waters in other states? So how do India river water laws affect river waters in other states?
So that's a good question. I am not actually sure about that. I haven't studied the way that river waters or riparian law impacts other states within India, because I've only ever looked at the way that it impacts Punjab. I don't know of any other states where river waters are such an integral issue to the population. So I don't think this is actually a big issue in other states in India, to be honest. Punjab's unique geography, the fact that we have these powerful rivers coming down from the Himalayas that produce so much water, but then that water is not used for our own agriculture, creates this really ridiculous scenario where we are surrounded by water but are not able to use it for ourselves. And I don't think that any other state suffers from the same consequences as we do, or has the same geographical tendencies. I'd be interested in actually seeing if similar. I've never heard of similar fights happening in eastern India or those eastern states, or in places like Uttar Pradesh and stuff like that. I'm not sure that they have these issues there. So I think this is a uniquely Punjab situation, from what I understand, but I can't speak to that directly.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think while you were presenting, some folks had asked questions as well. So I'll ask some of those. Oh, I think the person who asked the question also linked a Wikipedia article to the Godavari Water Disputes Tribunal.
So, okay, perfect.
Something to look into and maybe chat about next week.
Yeah.
So one of the participants had asked, why weren't these negotiations or ultimatums more impactful that adversely affect the other side or central government? So like not supplying grains or not enlisting in armed forces and fighting during Indo-Pak or Indochina wars. So I guess, the negotiations and ultimatums that, leaders had put in place during like the Panjabi Suba, that time period.
It is weird. Like, why didn't Sikhs use the leverage of the Indo-Pak war to try to get Panjabi Suba? Instead, we did the exact opposite. And when the war broke out, we're like, no, we're gung-ho pro-India. And we are going to like stand behind the Indian government, and we are going to be against Pakistan. And as a community, like officially, we're going to do this. The Shromni Akali Dal is going to do this. I think it speaks to the culture of the time, that pre-1978, pre-Amritsar massacre, the Saki massacre of 1978, when Bhai Fauja Singh and those 13 Sikhs were shaheed, Sikhs in India really consider themselves Indian and were really proud to be Indian. Even though the Indian government was discriminating against us, we still had a cultural sort of mindset of having ownership of the country. That we had bought into India and we were proud to be Indian and we stood up for India. And the idea of separating from India was like just an impossibility at that time. So I don't think we can discount the cultural aspects of it, that Sikhs really were patriotic at that time. So that putting the country in harm's way in terms of agricultural boycotts, putting the country in harm's way in terms of military boycotts, putting the country in harm's way in terms of the war with Pakistan, wasn't even considered by Sikh leadership. It was not even like an option that was on the table. I've never seen it in any documents that talked about like, maybe we should withhold our agricultural produce from the rest of India until we get Panjabi Suba. Even though Panjabi Suba was, and I saw this question in the question thing, it was really how engaged was the Sikh population during this time. The Sikh population was very engaged. Panjabi Suba was a mass movement where tons of Sikhs were involved in the movement and really engaged in the movement. So Sikhs were really engaged in Panjabi Suba, but they only were willing to go up to a certain point in terms of struggle against the Indian government. There was definitely a cultural constraint there that we are still proud Indians and we don't want to do a harm to the government. That there's that patriotism there that really doesn't exist in the aftermath of 78 and 84 in the same way. That there was definitely a cultural shift there in terms of how Sikhs consider themselves as part of India that used to be there that isn't there anymore. Yeah.
And even thinking of that time period and its proximity to like colonial rule. So how much are you trying to position yourself as like anti-British but pro-India? So I feel like that discourse at that time was also still more prevalent, of course, than it is today, because now we have events and distance from that time period.
Yes, definitely. Yep.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any more questions. We do still have time, so if folks want to put questions into the chat box, please feel free to. I had one question. While you were speaking, I think there was the shift to when Indira Gandhi kind of relented and was like, "Fine, we'll let you guys have a Punjabi speaking state." But I guess, yeah, I found maybe that shift a little bit confusing. And I know you said that we don't have time to like go into all of that and how those negotiations went, but I'm wondering kind of like what was the final straw, or what did that look like for her to finally, agree to something like this?
It was simply just the fact that Sikhs were protesting in such huge numbers for so long that's really what pushed it over the edge. And uh, they had almost relented a few times before that, but they weren't willing to go far enough in terms of actually creating a Punjabi speaking state that Sikhs were happy with. So negotiations would always fall apart because they'd always hold back on certain key issues. I'm not sure what Indira Gandhi's thinking was to finally cave in and allow Panjabi Suba, but we do know that the Panjabi Suba that was given was not exactly what we were looking for, right? So it was not a total victory. But I think it was simply just public pressure in terms of Sikhs constantly fighting and getting themselves arrested and pushing for this, and Sikh leadership pushing for this again and again and again. Those constant fasts and immolations up to death, say that we're going to immolate ourselves and burn ourselves to death and all that. I don't know how much of an impact those actually had. They seem to have just led to these really weird negotiations where the government wouldn't do anything. Then Sant Fateh Singh would say, "I'm going to fast it to death," and then the central government would be like, "Okay, we'll negotiate with you. We'll make this compromise with you." And then he would say, "Okay, they're negotiating with us. I'm going to call off my fast." And then after a couple of months, it would go back to before, and things would kind of fall apart again. So I don't know that wasn't really a very successful way to negotiate. And in fact, it's kind of embarrassing to look at it now, all these years later, to see like this is what Bantik leadership thought was a good negotiating tactic. And it was very much a Gandhian tactic. This is the kind of thing that Gandhi would do with the British. He would like fast unto death, or he would like take a vow of silence, and he would put political pressure on people. So this was very much in keeping with Gandhian principles, and not a very Sikh way of dealing with things, which is what Darshan Singh Pheruman was trying to make the point, that this is not the way the Sikhs should be dealing with things. And him doing it in spite of that was his whole point of like, if we're going to do something like this, we at least need to follow through and be true to our word, you know.
Yeah, I think that definitely helps. Yeah, paint that picture for me. We have two more questions. The first one is, how has the Panjabi language been politicized beyond Panjabi Suba? What does this look like today in modern day Punjab?
So if you go to Punjab today, I think one of the common critiques that people have when they go to Punjab today is that kids don't speak Punjabi. A lot of kids speak Hindi, or they go to English language schools or Hindi language schools, and that Punjabi language isn't doing as great as it could be doing in Punjab. So Punjabi language, and you know, there's a larger discussion that can take place here that we don't have time for in this class. The conflation of Punjabi issues with Sikh issues is really interesting, and an interesting sociological phenomenon. That, like, Panjabi Suba was a Sikh-led issue. It should have been a Punjab issue where Sikhs and Hindu Punjabis both were on board with it to protect Punjabi language, but for some reason, not for some reason, but we know the reasons why, it became a purely Sikh-led issue, and Hindu Punjabis were not on board with it. So it became a very politicized issue. It became very much a communal issue. It became very much a Sikh issue instead of a Punjab cultural issue, unfortunately. And that meant that, and that means that even today, you know, language and language rights are one of the biggest points of contention that these areas of the world that are minority populations have with their central governments. And I'm just thinking about Canada in specific, with Quebec and Canada rights, and what French language issues are here in Canada are pretty severe. Punjabi language became this political issue and became a Sikh issue, and has stopped, I think, after Panjabi Suba, it stopped being as core of an issue because we figured we had won that battle. But actually, if you look at it culturally and linguistically, we are not maintaining Punjabi language to the levels that we should be doing. The places like the Basque area of Spain or France, or the French areas of, or the Flemish areas of Belgium are doing. You know, Punjabi language isn't promoted enough by the state government. Punjabi language isn't encouraged enough for children to speak it. And there are still some severe issues with the way that Punjabi language is being protected within Punjab today.
I think along the same lines, another question is, was the demand always for a Punjabi-speaking state on linguistic lines, as many others in India at that time, or did the idea of a Sikh majority state ever come up in the 50s?
So the Sikh political leaders were playing a little bit of a game there, and to be honest, if we're being critical of them, and this is the point of this course, is to be also critical of Sikh leadership as well, and to give a fair perspective, a fair reading. They never said that their goal was a Sikh majority state, but everyone knew that if Panjabi Suba was created, it would create a Sikh majority state. The Sikh political leadership, their statements and their struggle and their political goals always was Punjabi speaking state for all Punjabis, and this is not a communal issue. They were very clear on that, but everyone knew that it also meant the Sikhs would get a majority. And that's really what scared the central government. They didn't want Sikhs to have a political that level of political power within the country of India. So it was not something that they ever said openly, like, oh yeah, we want Panjabi Suba so we can have a majority and we can have our own governments finally. But everyone knew that that was sort of the unsaid part of the whole thing, that would be the end result if Panjabi Suba happened. Ironically now, it looks like that might change because demographically Punjab is shifting in a major way. So many young Punjabis are leaving the state, and so many non-Punjabis are moving into the state. And so you're having a large demographic shift in Punjab where people who are not Punjabi speaking are coming into the state and young Punjabi speaking people are leaving the state. And will Sikhs continue to be a majority within Punjab? Um, I would think that in a few decades that probably won't be the case, to be honest, unfortunately. And that speaks to a lot of other issues in terms of economics and trauma over 84 and all sorts of other questions, you know?
Thank you. And our last question is more of like an open-ended, what are your thoughts question. It seems the central government has always been allegedly busier, tramping northern or eastern states, whereas southern states stay out of Congress's influence or interest. Do you have any thoughts on this? Do you feel, if there's anything you want to comment?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Southern states are like Tamil Nadu and what's it
Kerala?
called? Kerala and Assam and a lot of these other states in the east and the south are really militantly anti-Hindi speaking, for example, very much so, and very, very protective of their language and culture. And they have stayed out of that zone of influence of Congress to a large degree. Uh, I think Congress considered Punjab to be in that zone of influence that they should have control over. And the fact that Punjab demographically is such a split between Hindu Punjabis and Sikh Punjabis, even though Congress has always claimed to be a secular party, we all know the reality that it's a North Indian upper caste Hindu party. And that's pretty much what it always has been from the early 1900s onwards. And so Hindu Punjabis have always been very pro-Congress and pro-central government, and Sikhs have always been sort of anti-central government. And this has led to a lot of the interesting dynamics within Punjab because you have these huge populations where they're both almost a majority of the population, you know? I'm not sure of the larger political reasons why the South has evaded the cultural influence of the North. I think proximity is probably one issue. Cultural history is probably another issue. But definitely Punjab being so close to Delhi as it is, and it used to border Delhi, of course, pre 1966. It really is considered by Delhi to be within its sway of influence. That's something that should be definitely within the control of the central government. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like folks are really interested in doing this. Yeah, it's helpful, and folks are interested in like this comparative analysis of how Punjab and other states are treated. There's a comment, it might be useful to compare Punjab was treated differently or similar to other states on both water rights and how the linguistic principles were applied to reorganizing states. Taking a more holistic.
Yeah, I do know that even southern states have suffered the issue of president's rule to a large degree, the way that Punjab has as well. So that the central government has interfered, and even in southern states in a large way when they don't like the state governments. And this happened a lot under more authoritarian governments like Indira Gandhi. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you so much, Santveer Singh. I'm going to wrap it up for today. But again, on behalf of SikhRI, I thank Santveer Singh and our e-Sangat today. Thank you all for tuning in and for spending this time with us. Next week, we will be examining the socioeconomic repercussions of the Green Revolution and the significance of the Anandpur Sahib Resolution. And in the meantime, don't forget to tune into the Sikhcast, a podcast produced by SikhRI, where we explore the various issues and events affecting Sikhs worldwide. Thank you for joining in today. Today's online course will be ending now. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.